Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the Hulu series Mid-Century Modern with creators, writers, and showrunners Max Mutchnick and David Kohan. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you both about was to do with the development of this project, because I've heard that this is a concept that had been kind of lingering for both of you for a while, and you talked about it quite a bit. But it was having a conversation with Ryan Murphy that kind of really propelled that engine into making this happen and kind of really sitting down and figuring it out. And I was interested in how that collaboration and that conversation really set the foundation of putting all the pieces together for you both.
We had written a pilot many, many years ago when we were young writers that was rejected by the universe. But and it was about old people and living in an assisted living facility. And
We wanted to cast Tony Curtis and Alan Arkin
yeah,
and Elaine
Stritch.
Stritch and Sandy Dennis.
Yeah.
That was our ideal. That was our cast.
Ratings grabbers, and we were working at Warner Brothers at the time, and they just were not responsive to the show was called Senioritis, because we had heard that in these homes, in these assisted living places, that a lot of these seniors it was just like high school, right? And there was everything that high school had in it, except they were octogenarians.
Yeah, high school with gray hair.
Yeah, and we just thought that would be terrific. So it's something that we've always liked because we've always responded to older. So it's something that we both like because older people are funnier, they're wiser, and if you have an interest, you can learn a lot. And
then we became older people.
Yeah, and we thought, well, we might as well do this before we're gone. and I was in New York. I mean, the strike was happening, and David and I thought, well, during this time, why don't we just keep working out our writing muscles, and we thought we would give this thing a shot. And I talked about it at a dinner with Ryan, and he responded to it right away and said, I want to do that. And, when he says something like that, he usually means it. And in this case, he very much meant it. And then here we are.
Yeah. And
I also think sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and in writing it, our dream casting initially was if we could get Nathan Lane to do this. He was sort of our muse for that character the entire time. And the first thing Ryan said was, I think this would be good for Nathan Lane. Why don't I give it to him tomorrow when he's on the set of the show that I'm doing? And he did, and that's how that came about.
And so when something goes from a script that we just have in our hands to Nathan Lane wants to play a Bunny Schneiderman, it's like, wow, this is going to be real.
Bashert is the word. It means meant to be.
Yeah, and that was very exciting very, very motivating for us.
I love that. And even what you were describing before about with that initial concept feeling a little bit high school, I think that there's aspects of that kind of feel like they come into play with this, because anytime you have a group of characters and they're in a bubble situation with each other, it creates these heightened elements in terms of how they respond to things because they are each other's entire world. And so how did you find that bubble and that pressure cooker of these characters all living together and being each other's full whole lives really allowed you to play with those heightened elements, especially in terms of some of the comedy that comes into it?
Yeah, these are guys who, they had their experience in their 20s and 30s with each other, but haven't really lived together since that time. And so it's sort of a big decision. And because they know each other well, it happens seamlessly, but getting accustomed to this new set of circumstances is
is the series.
Yes.
That's what it ends up being about. Learning to live together.
And there's also a really nice dynamic at play from having a mix of ages between them as well, because within the LGBTQIA community, every generation has completely different experiences. It's not monolithic. And I think there's a really sweet conversation between Bunny and between Matt Bomer's character, Jerry, at one point, where he's like, I couldn't allow this to be romantic because I needed you in my life and I needed this friendship. And so, how do you feel like that intention also gave you a lot of different places to explore story-wise?
Well, it's interesting because that was not the original conception. That's actually something else we have Ryan to thank for, because originally that character, Jerry, that character was the same age as as Bunny and Arthur. And when Ryan suggested Matt Bomer, initially, I don't know how you felt, but it sort of threw me a little bit. But then when we thought about it, it seemed like a great idea. We even fooled around with the idea that, well, we'll cast Matt Bomer, but we'll say he's 63. And to the consternation of the other two things, but it felt like a one joke gimmick because nobody would believe he is in fact 63. So then it became its own thing.
But that the younger gay guy in the chosen family is the son, right? It's so much a part of the fabric of the world that we're writing about. It's so organic that it didn't feel like we were creating something that didn't exist.
There's also something really fun in terms of the comedy with that character as well, with Jerry, because he's a little bit slower on the uptick of things, so it kind of almost allows you to sometimes land a second punchline from here's the joke and here's the moment that he gets the joke. And so, how did you find the pacing and the rhythm of writing his character so specifically in that way?
Well, there's also the sense of him being a bit of an innocent and a bit of a more sort of open-hearted character, and it actually plays better with him as a younger, more wide-eyed and open-hearted character. If he was, if it was played by an older actor, I don't think it would have the same impact. But
I think we have daughters that are the same age, and it took me a little while to come around to the place where I would listen to them and think that they had something to say that I could learn something from. I'm just not one of those parents. Oh, I learned something from Tiffany every day. That that's just not the kind of dad I am. But as they start to age, and ours have, you listen to these minds, and it's like, oh, you really do have something very interesting to say, and you have a very interesting take on life. And I think that we bring some of that daughter love that we have in our homes to this character for sure.
And it also plays really nicely. Each of them have their own comedic voice and style, with Arthur as a character. And I've heard you say that you wanted him to kind of feel like a mix between Andre Leon Talley and James Baldwin, and, to have that introspect, but also to have that kind of like sarcasm and biting humor. And so how did you develop that character in that way?
When you think about those two voices coming together with James Baldwin, this intellectual and social critic, and there was a sense that the real world is never quite lives up to his ideals of what it should be, and Andre Leon Talley, who just in a similar kind of way, nor is it as elegant and full of panache and elan as it should be, and that character was always intriguing to the both of us. I have an imagination and a sense of how the world should be, and nothing quite measures up to that. And it's always a source of a bit of disappointment. And that kind of a character sort of always appealed to us.
But the other thing that's kind of wonderful for me with this show is that you get to put a character like that, in a room with a character like Matt Bomer, like Jerry, right? That Jerry and Arthur are united and are friends. First of all, it feels honest, and it also feels very it's very true to the gay world. We take in strays, And because I think a lot of us feel like that, right? And so making acceptance part of the fabric and the spine of the show really helps us to create great scenes and very disparate personalities.
I also think with what you're describing there in terms of looking at what's their dynamic, one of the things that's really great about setting up this show around these four characters is you have what's the dynamic when all four of them are in the room together, but then you get to have these individual relationships and they all look very different. And I was interested in how you kind of play around with finding that when you're in the early stages of development and script writing, just to see what's the group dynamic and what's each of these individual pairings.
Right. Well, it was easy to find, for example, with Sybil and Arthur, when his attitude about moving in is like you realize that there's a little bit of an edge between Arthur and Sybil, and she overhears him basically saying, "We'll move her into an assisted living facility as soon as we can," and she overhears him, and it's understood that they've had their differences and they bump up against each other, but they also love each other. You're still family, right? You're still family, and I'm not going to mince words. I'm going to tell you what annoys me about you, and there's something sort of bracingly honest about it, and there's also that underneath it, that sense of acceptance.
And the better we define the characters, the better it is for us to tell stories, because there's no confusion. You know exactly, once you land on a story, you know exactly the way Arthur is going to handle it. You know exactly the way Jerry's going to handle it, because they are, or the way Bunny, for that matter. So you, it helps you. It helps you in telling these stories.
No, I think you're so right with that. And there's also this aspect with the specificity of how do they all do something in a group? Watching them play pickleball and the fact that they go, "Oh, we've rehearsed already, let's take it from the top again,"
Mm-hmm.
isn't how other characters would walk onto a pickleball court. So how did you find those spaces of what's so uniquely them in terms of how they're all going to approach
What's
things?
important about the pickleball, episode, I think, is that it's sports, and team sports in particular for gay men is a very sensitive area. It has been, historically. PE has never been like the safest haven in the world for a young gay boy, and I just loved the idea that we were creating a safe space for these friends, and no one was going to be hard on anybody because they had all experienced the bullying and the toughness, and that they don't do that to each other is to me what's the joy of that
But
episode.
then you say how each of them reacts to the bully who is Bunny's sister, and Jerry falls apart and cries. Arthur gets angry and storms off, and Bunny regresses back to his childhood self, and pretty soon has his sister in a headlock. So it's a reaction, and it's all filtered through their characters to the same notion of being bullied for sports.
And I think that's such a great point about Bunny and his sister and the way that they regress back to childhood, because we see that in a number of different ways. And even they both grew up in the same house with the same parents, but they had two different lived experiences, and that still affects them to this day. And how did you set about building what you felt like that history was going to be like, especially because they're in the show with Sybil as a character, with their mother being present in their lives?
The it's sort of formed just out of conversations that we would have in the writers' room. We all talked about our own dynamics, the dynamic between, say, my mother and my sister, or the dynamic between, where you have parents where one of them is the chosen one, in the eyes of the parent, and the fact that we knew that we wanted siblings who, though they fought and had their issues, that they really did love each other and they really did defend each other, and so that it could be a richer, more complicated kind of relation. And the fact that we got Pam Adlon to play the part was also a boon. That was another lucky that we could have that. I mean, we really lucked out with casting.
Yeah, and isn't Sybil, who's Linda Lavin's character, played so wonderfully by her in the show, based a little bit on your mom, David, and with some of the
Yes,
lines in the first episode coming from things that your sister had said in a eulogy to
that's
her.
right. That's right.
How
That's
do you
right.
how do you know all of this?
Internet research.
Oh, okay, okay.
Either that or I've just been hiding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that
Um, sorry.
no, and you look, the dynamics that you know in your life that resonated with you that you think are funny, it's, if you have the actors that can pull it off, you put it into the script and it plays the way you would hope they play.
Yeah. I also, going back to the mention of that scene between Arthur and Sybil, where it's, I'm going to be tough love on you, but I love you, let's hug. I think what's so beautiful about that, that really is encompassed throughout the show, is that idea of we can all say these things to each other, but if anyone else comes into the room and tries to say any of these things, then we are going to protect them. Like, you can't say it, but we can. And so what are the ways in which you really wanted to kind of use that part of the space and the honesty that they have with each other, but also the protectiveness whenever you were looking at bringing other characters into the mix and into the story?
I don't think everything has to be adverse. I mean, characters can, to the extent that it is now in the world, right? You can have disagreements. You can be opposites, and you can still coexist, and you can still talk things out. And that's the world that I want to live in. It's become something else out there. So, in this world where we can control it, we're going to make it that opposites are able to have complicated conversations and still come out the other side loving each other.
And you've got amazing guest stars in this, but it feels like all of their characters are really developed and very intentional. And even with the fact that you start bringing some of them back, so we see some of them throughout multiple episodes. We meet Richard Kind in a bar, and then we get to see where is he a few episodes later when he comes back. Was that something that was intentional from the offset of we don't want to just visit all of these characters and guest characters once, but we want to see where they may fit into the story again?
You play with them, you write them. The actor shows up. It all is weighted on how does it go that week, right? And if it's someone that fits into the world, you want to go back and revisit it. That's not to say that an actor that does a one-off, wasn't fantastic, but we like to build an ensemble because it really makes it fun for the actors on stage. It makes it fun for the audience, when characters return.
But I will say also that just with that specific example, Richard Kind was the person we had in mind when we were writing that part. We heard his voice, and it was exactly as we hoped. It was so he's really funny.
I love that. And also, in terms of your director on the series, the fact that you have James Burrows, and I think, he obviously has so much experience in this space of multicam sitcoms, and so do the two of you. And I was interested in what that collaborative partnership looked like and how you feel like that really elevated the material that you were creating in the show by having him.
At this point, he's like our father, so there's a lot of pleasing going on. But the nice thing on this one is it's been a joy to give Jimmy the tools that he needs to make a great show every week, and really all that he asks for is a very solid acting troupe. And we are just blessed that that it came together, and then you get the best of everybody because you get the best of him.
And with writing for a multicam sitcom and with all the experience that you have, how did you find that having worked on shows like Will and Grace kind of really gave you this experience to create the world of this series? And what are some of the specific elements that come into play specifically for this format?
Well, I will say, and just to your point about experience, it was incredibly helpful when we had all of this stuff going on, like when with Linda dying and the fires in LA, and there were all sorts of things that happened during the course of production. And the fact that we all knew each other and had worked together for years was incredibly helpful in terms of weathering those difficult times, you know. And
As a group, we knew how to lock in and get the job done.
I mean, in terms of the content, you know, it's almost like we aged. We were roughly Will and Grace's age when we made that, and now we're the age of Bunny Schneiderman now that we're making this, and it's sort of been a natural evolution. You know, it feels natural. It feels like writing what you know.
Yeah. And if it's okay to talk a little bit about, you know, rewriting the end of the show after Linda's passing. And I'm, you know, so sorry that you went through that experience, because she was
Thank you.
obviously so integral to the show and as a friend to you both as well. But I think what was beautiful about the way that you handled that in terms of storyline was it really fit in with everything that you'd already built in the series. You know, the very first episode opens up with the idea of we've lost a friend, and it's really important to find that momentum and to cherish the life that we have and the time that we get to spend with each other and our relationships. And so how did you find that everything that you'd already created in the episodes that you filmed up to that point actually set you up in a place to be able to write that story when you needed to?
I mean,
I don't know how to speak to it.
yes,
It was all very. We were very fortunate in the way that we had built a foundation that could support this kind of trauma, but it's never what we set out to do.
we had so many. We had lots of plans for Civil, you know, and but like in life, you know, the best laid plans, right? So what choice do you have? You can't pack it all in. Life is for the living, right? So you have to go on, even though you've just suffered this devastating loss, and that becomes the subject. Okay, we've suffered a devastating loss. Let's deal with it. Let's gather around each other so we can help each other through it, and then let's go on living while still honoring this person who we loved and lost.
It feels strange to talk about it because it was such an upsetting thing, but it fit into the idea of a show where everything lined up the right way. All of the right people were where they were supposed to be at the right time, and I mean, we obviously never would want this to have happened, but because of all of the characters that were there, and they had the experience that they had, and we have the experience we have, we were able to shoulder the burden of doing this and kind of doing it in real time.
Yeah. I also think one of the beautiful things about the show is that it really honors that idea that part of how we navigate difficult situations in life is through humor. And it's a tool that so many of us use for these moments.
Mhm.
And how did you want to, in many ways, in many different storylines and moments, really use humor to be able to have those more emotional beats in a show like this?
It's, you know, that's what we always that's what Max and I have always turned to in our you know, in the sad moments. You acknowledge it, but you have to be funny. You know, it's funny because the character of Grace and Will and Grace is based on a relationship that Max had, and she's a woman who always laughs through her tears, who, you know, that is her way of dealing with tragic situations, and it's always effective because it doesn't minimize the pain, but it does offer a way to get through it.
And you know, in our life and in our personal lives outside of all of this, there is a moment that once took place that we refer to all the time, and it starts with a very serious thing. A dear friend of mine, her mother contracted brain cancer, and Dave and I were writing, and we were young writers, and I came into the room, and I said to him, you know, Mel's mom has brain cancer, and he didn't hear me. But at the time, he was playing with a cat.
With your cat.
He was playing with a cat. So I said to him, Mel's mother has brain cancer. And I look over at him, and on the heels of saying that, Dave goes, do, 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 do. He dances across the room like a crazy person. Do, 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 following a cat.
That's how I deal with my grief.
That's how he deals with his grief. But the collision of like this super heavy thing that had just happened to me on the phone, and then telling it to him, and he just didn't hear me, and he's just dancing around the room. It was just so funny, but it was so honest, and
it's shifting the prism. Like you look at something through the lens of just grief, and it's heavy, and it's sad, and all you do is sort of like shift the prism a little bit, and suddenly it puts it casts it in a different light. Like it's. We wanted to go from the heaviness of losing to the celebration of the fact that this dynamic, funny woman was once here and will always be a part of us.
Yeah. I mean, even just when you were telling that story, there's so much physicality to the way that we express and tell humor as well. And I think this show really captures this. What is the space for you when you're writing of figuring out the physical side of comedy versus where you want to just leave a little bit of space for performers like this to be able to play and find some of it themselves as well? Because I imagine it's a balance of prepared ideas and things.
Jim brings a lot of that to his time with the actors, but we the writing room is connected to the stage. The blueprints for the set are large and on the board in front of us, and we really do think of. We think of all of it at one time. What are the words that they are saying, and what are the physical actions that they are taking when it's happening. I mean, and in the heaviest episode of the season, Nathan Lane does one of the best physical comedy bits with all of the Tupperware, flying out of that cabinet, and that's just kind of the joy of this form of writing too.
I also feel like earlier you were talking a little bit about the specificity of these characters, and it feels so often like the more specific you make the details, kind of the broader of an appeal and kind of connection actually allows audiences to have. And so what were some of the details that you felt were really important to make very specific when you were developing these characters?
Well, I mean, we had known, for example, a person who was part of the Mormon Church, who had and who had to make a break from the Mormon Church because the Mormon Church had to make a break from him, kind of a thing. But he still had vestigial feelings for it. It still played a vital role, and there were still elements that were important to him and he believed in. And those kinds I mean, look, that's a very specific kind of thing, but it has universal appeal. That thing of this has let me down, but there are elements that I still believe. I want to take what I can from it, and it's relatable, even though you may not have had that specific experience at all.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I really, really enjoyed the show. The moment I sat down and hit play on episode 1, I watched the whole thing through in one go. So congratulations and thank you so much.
Thank you. We love that.
Thank you for saying so.